Prediction season is finally coming to a close. We have made it to the mountaintop. It is finally time to predict my college football playoff, my national championship prediction, and who else to have on the show other than Colton of Ono Sports, friend of the program. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited to be here, talk some ball. We're almost there. We're almost over the hump. The 800 million year drought between the end of one season and the beginning of the other is almost over. I could not be more excited right now, Reed.
Yeah, at the time of recording, we are almost 10 days away from the college football season kicking off. And the reason I bring Colton on for this episode is because he has already put out his playoff prediction. He's already put out his conference champion predictions. So why not compare, get his insight on my predictions, his predictions, and compare a little bit of who we think is going to win the national championship, who is going to make the college football playoff.
Oh, yeah. And be sure, before we get into it, drop your picks in the comment section below of who you think is going to win the college football playoff this year. Sound off.
And also, before we get into it, make sure to go subscribe to Colton's channel. Does great work, great content. Mainly go give him a follow on Twitter, too. Does not get enough credit for the work he does on Twitter as well. But without further ado, let's get into the college football playoff predictions. Starting off with Colton's predictions of his conference championship winners. This is mainly going to be his segment because obviously this is his predictions of who he is going to win in each conference. So, Colton, what are we thinking here?
Yeah, and I mean, I can't imagine it would look too dissimilar to yours. A lot of these teams are going to be like the consensus teams. There's not a ton of variable, I think, this year. Second team in the ACC title game after Miami. Obviously, everybody's picking Miami. Why wouldn't you? But Louisville, to me, has a clearer strength than SMU, and that is the run game and that offensive line. I think SMU's offensive line will be good, but I definitely like Isaac Brown and Keywan Brown at Louisville. I think they'll complement that offense super well, be the clearest strength overall, or at least the clearest second strength in the ACC. And I do have them at 8-4 making it. So I don't particularly see the ACC being too strong in 2026. But for the Big Ten, I feel like these are the two juggernauts at the moment. There are a couple of other teams that, we're going to differ on. Probably there's Oregon, who a lot of people are power rating in the preseason towards the top of the Big Ten. Some people have them winning the Big Ten. In the Big 12, Texas Tech's going to be, the supreme leader in that conference until somebody antes up with them and goes toe-to-toe. I do like a few other teams in that conference. I have Arizona State there, which least popular pick out of all of these picks. I really like Arizona State. Last year, they dealt with a lot of injuries. They dealt with Sam Leavitt missing key games at quarterback. They were very, very strong last year despite that. They obviously made the Big 12 title game the year before. I think they'll be back in the mix despite some, key departures elsewhere on that team. I think Kenny Dillingham's running a tight ship there. In the SEC, Georgia and Texas are going to be the two strongest teams, at least on paper. Two of the strongest coaching staffs in the SEC. I think I have LSU and Alabama right behind them. But to me, Georgia and Texas are going to be the clear favorites on paper.
I have pretty much the exact same matchups across the board. So we'll start on the left side here for me. In the SEC championship, I am going to have Texas losing to Georgia. I have the Georgia Bulldogs going for a three-peat until Sark can prove me wrong and get the monkey off his back that is Kirby Smart and beat him head-to-head. I just am not finding a way for him to beat Kirby Smart, especially in the SEC championship where they have met before. Yeah, until Sark proves me wrong, I'm going with the Georgia Bulldogs, and I think they go for a three-peat in the SEC. In the ACC, I am going to be aligned with you there as well. I also have Miami running the ACC. Best roster on paper, best coaching staff on paper. I agree with you that Louisville might have the best running game holistically in this conference. I do agree that Louisville might have the edge there on the running game, but I think Miami holistically, with their coordinator edge, head coaching edge, I respect the hell out of Jeff Brom, but I think Mario Cristobal is in a realm of his own when it comes to ACC head coaches. So I think Miami finally wins their first ACC championship game and gets over the hump there. I am also going to have Ohio State and Indiana meeting up in the Big Ten championship, where I will have the Ohio State Buckeyes just edging it out over Kurt Signetti and the Indiana Hoosiers. I think Ohio State is out for blood this year, especially with how their season ended last year. Everyone's going to mention that the schedule is way harder, and I fully acknowledge that. I think Ohio State holistically is the best team on paper in the Big Ten. Obviously, there's going to be a three-way battle between them, Indiana, and Oregon. I think Ohio State just squeaks this out in the end, beats Kurt Signetti, gets revenge for last year in the same exact matchup, and Ohio State ends up being the 1 seed overall in the playoff, as we'll get to in a second. And of course, Texas Tech. Until I see it to believe it, I think no one beats Texas Tech head to head in this conference. I think holistically, this team is going to be the best on paper, best coaching staff on paper, the best program overall, as I've mentioned in my predictions of the Big 12. Kansas State, I do think, is a sneaky team that could make a run, especially having one of the easiest schedules in the conference. Actually, 2 of the teams here with the easiest schedules overall in conference, per my estimation. So Texas Tech, I think, just edges it out on the end. Colin Klein, I think, takes Kansas State on a magical run through the Big 12 schedule and ends up making them into the Big 12 championship contender. But I think Texas Tech holistically is the best team in this conference, best roster, top to bottom. And I do think they make it to the Big 12 championship and win it once again in back-to-back fashion. And we're going to start with his teams on the bubble going into the playoff. We have his G6 teams, we have his at-large teams, and his conference runner-ups that are in contention. So, Colton, who of this list stands out to you specifically when you were making your bracket, and who do you think would have the edge per the committee's view?
It's really hard to go undefeated in a season, so I don't necessarily 100% believe my own prediction there, but Notre Dame's going to be in the playoff, I believe, unless they lose 2 games like they did last year, which I don't think will happen. I have them at 12-0, so they are for sure a lock in that scenario where they are undefeated. Louisville and Arizona State, I like both of those teams, but to me, they're just not strong enough from a record standpoint. As many people have pointed out on Twitter, I'm fairly low on everybody. I have everybody kind of beating everybody, so I don't have as many 10-win and 11-win teams as you will have, Reed. So Indiana and Texas, I believe, as runners-up, you almost have to include them. They're the 2 biggest power conference runners-up, and they both have strong records. Texas at 10-3 is kind of like the Alabama of last season, where they might not win the SEC. They might get blown out, in all honesty. I don't have a ton of faith in Texas. I don't think they'll be bad, but like you said, like you alluded to, it's going to have to be a see it to believe it before I believe Texas can, win on that kind of scale. SMU is my first team out in the ACC in terms of the ACC title game. I don't necessarily see the ACC, unfortunately, as more than a 1-bid team in this scenario, necessarily as good as a couple SEC or a couple Big Ten teams. You get below them, Oregon and Michigan, I think at 10 wins right outside of that Big Ten title bubble, I think are probably going to make it in. And then in the SEC, LSU, I believe, will make it in. Oklahoma and Alabama are going to be the 2 at large, just outside the SEC title game teams. And I think Alabama, with the slight edge in terms of overall record, would get the nod there. All of my at large, other than the G6 champion, because I do have Notre Dame at the end. The biggest controversy with mine would be Alabama sneaking in over a USC or an SMU, and I think Alabama would be the biggest outlier there, and it would be between Alabama, USC, and SMU. SMU, I think, is the runt of the litter, but USC I would have with a pretty strong overall record. Strength of record, I believe I have them actually upsetting Oregon, which would be huge for their strength of schedule and strength of record, but I have them dropping, I think, a couple extra games that maybe otherwise they shouldn't. I think it's either UCLA or Penn State. I can't exactly remember. It would end up being LSU and Alabama at the very end. And then for my G6 champion, if it wasn't obvious to tell, I'm not super high on any of the G6 teams either, other than UNLV, who I would have as an 11-2 conference champion with 1 loss in conference. So I think by default they would be our de facto G6 representative in my bracket.
From my point of view, these are the teams I'm going to have on the bubble from the respective Power 4 and the G6. Pretty similar holistically to what you have on paper for yours. Just the records are a little different on my end. Penn State 10-2, Big Ten at large team, just missing out on a chance to play in Indianapolis. BYU, I think, just misses out on playing in the Big 12 championship just solely because they're going to have 1 out-of-conference loss to Notre Dame. I think they also drop a game within conference, and due to head-to-head tiebreakers, Kansas State would get the edge overall, losing the conference championship game. Louisville, I have as another conference championship loser, losing that game to Miami, so they would be 10-3 at this point. Clemson, another ACC team, I think having a 10-2, just misses out on a conference championship appearance, but I think Dabo Swinney has this team at least in a conversation as an at-large team out of the ACC. But I fully agree with you. I think the ACC is a 1-bid league at this point. unless one of these teams that we all have on the bubble somehow prove us wrong and, are really competitive and have a strong resume. Alabama, I have as a bubble team at 10-2. And I've made this known on Twitter that a bold prediction of mine is Alabama will go 10-2, but miss the college football playoff. And I'm sticking by that prediction. I think that there are other teams that would be better on paper than Alabama, even though they go 10-2. Realistically, I have Alabama finishing 5th in the SEC, even though they have a 10-2 overall record. They finish 7-1 in conference play. I think the Crimson Tide just miss out on a chance at the playoff here. That's a bold prediction of mine. The committee could completely, shut the door in my face on that one, just solely because they seem to have bias towards Big Ten and SEC teams. But I think Alabama holistically misses out on a playoff appearance at 10-2. I think Utah is going to be a really good team this year. I like their direction with Morgan Scalley at the helm, holding on to Devon Dampier, especially after everything that they lost to Michigan with Kyle Whittingham and staff going over there. I think Utah is going to be a really good competitive team once again. I think Morgan Scalley is going to have this team not missing a beat, and we'll have the Utes competing near the top of the Big 12 once again. Kansas State, already talked about. I think Colin Klein has a spectacular year one. Tennessee, I put here at 9-3 because I have them winning a few games against other teams, or similar comparison around them. Like I have them beating Alabama head to head. I think that they sneak that one out. Some of the head-to-head wins that they do have within conference play, and namely out of conference, like they have to go on the road to Georgia Tech. I think that is a quality win that should not get overlooked.
I don't have too many gripes here. Like I said, I'm generally lower on a lot of teams, not just like specifically, but just in general. I don't have as many 10-win teams as
I'm
you
very
do.
generous.
Clemson to me stands out because Clemson isn't a team that a lot of people, even the AP poll, is not very high on Clemson. So I was wondering what specifically about Clemson.
This is similar in my point of view to how Kirby Smart is at Georgia right now. Not in the similar light that, Kirby Smart has fallen off a cliff like Dabo has. Based on his resume and what he has done in the past, you cannot overlook him. I think Clemson in this similar light, it's still Dabo Swinney. He still has a lot of gas left in the tank, even though a lot of people are writing him off. I think he might get fired after this year, or they might at least part ways with him after this year if they don't compete to this level that I expect him to. Tom Allen, to your point, I think he has a massive second year. I think holistically they take a step up. They made some key additions throughout the defense through the portal that I think are going to be really impactful. And I think Vizina, I mean, he's now in his third year in the program, I believe. He's been in that system, even though they are bringing in a new offensive coordinator and Chad Morris coming back to Clemson. I think my main point is I think Dabo still has a lot left in the tank, and I think people shouldn't be writing him off.
Yeah, and I mean, from a narrative perspective, Clemson's kind of turned into an every other year team. I remember, was it 2023 where they went, I think 9-4 or 8-4, and then won a bowl game. And then the next season, 2024, they made the college football playoff. So last year, down year, if the trend continues, you might not be too far off. That one's interesting to me. Penn State, I don't think we're too separated there. I have them at 9 wins, but a 9-3 Penn State versus a 10-2 Penn State, it's going to be almost a different team. Like a 10-2 Penn State, in my opinion, would be probably an A tier team versus a 9-3 is probably going to be a B with losses to like the biggest opponents, and then strength of wins there not being as good as maybe if they upset one of the teams that might be favored over them, like a USC. From what I'm predicting, I would say I don't have many other complaints other than that. I'm much lower on Clemson than you are, but other than that, maybe Utah. I think I have them at 8 wins. Not too many complaints for me here.
Before we get into my playoff prediction reveal, we have to talk about Colton's. This is how his bracket is going to lay out. Colton, let me get your thoughts here. I see you have Kirby Smart once again running the sport.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily because I'm the highest on Georgia out of all these teams. I actually think they're going to get the toughest matchup of this playoff in that quarterfinal matchup with Indiana. I think that might actually end up being the game of this playoff. I think that's probably the two best coaching staffs in the sport going head to head. And I have them eking out a victory in that one. And it might be controversial even because Indiana is going to be very, very strong at the line of scrimmage once again. But I have a ton of faith in this Georgia team. What am I trying to say? They're going to be one of the highest returning production teams in the sport. And like we have already talked about, they're a team that won the SEC last year with Gunnar Stockton at the helm, with that offensive line, with some elite running back talent and a good offense, I think, could take a drastic step forward, or a good defense that could take a drastic step forward with Glenn Schumann. They kind of underperformed. When you say underperformed, it has a negative connotation because you think it means they're bad. They were good. They probably could have been elite, weren't quite there. I think they can get there this year. And then you get Georgia and Ohio State, which is probably the most predictable college football playoff national championship you can predict out there. It's probably the two best programs in the past 10 years going head to head. But I really like both of those teams. I think they both have pretty clear routes to the championship in my prediction. I think they're going to be a lot stronger than the teams that they play. Maybe not, like I said, with Georgia and Indiana. I think they're going to be pretty even, but Kirby Smart has the experience there, whereas maybe Kurt Cignetti's been on a better run. I trust that staff in that spot a tiny bit more. Plus, these two staffs have never played each other, so it's not like they're going to have a ton of experience with one another. So it could go one way or the other there. Ultimately, though, I do have Georgia winning the national championship in 2026.
A fascinating playoff. And again, I think Georgia is going to be a really competitive team. But without further ado, we have to break down my playoff prediction. Getting into my college football playoff predictions now, number one overall seed, I'm going to have the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Big 12 champions, being the number one overall seed. They will take on the 8-9 game of Oregon as an at-large team out of the Big 10 versus LSU, another at-large team out of the SEC, going on the road all the way up to Autzen Stadium. The Oregon Ducks advancing to take on Ohio State in an all Big 10 quarterfinal. The Big 10 runner-ups, the Indiana Hoosiers at 11-2, taking on the G6 representative, the Boise State Broncos. That goes without saying. I think Indiana runs the gauntlet there, run it up on Boise State eventually, and the Indiana Hoosiers go into a national championship rematch against the ACC champion in the 4 seed, the Miami Hurricanes. Moving on to the bottom half of my bracket, I'm going to have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish as the 2 seed, undefeated. I think they end up getting a nod over Georgia just solely because that undefeated record. They would have beaten some good teams along the way, Miami, BYU, SMU. I think the Notre Dame Fighting Irish get the benefit of the doubt, especially with their special favorite rule of being in the top 12 spot. They get a first-round bye, taking on what could potentially be the most fascinating matchup, in my opinion, in the first round. We get the Red River Shootout on a campus at Texas, Oklahoma going on the road to Austin to take on the SEC runner-up Texas Longhorns, where I will have the Oklahoma Sooners on the road, knocking off the Texas Longhorns, and John Mateer gets his signature win in an Oklahoma uniform. They upset Texas on the road in a Red River Shootout. My 3 seed, the SEC championship, FCC champion Georgia Bulldogs at 12-1, facing the winner of the Big 12 championship, Texas Tech at 12-1, and my final at-large team, the Penn State Nittany Lions at 10-2, sneak in the college football playoff by some miraculous job done by Matt Campbell in year one. The Nittany Lions make it in year one of his tenure, but unfortunately the magical run ends there. They will lose to Texas Tech on the road in Lubbock, ending the magical run there by Matt Campbell and co. So moving on to the quarterfinal round, starting up at the top here, Ohio State and Oregon, a rematch, hopefully in the Rose Bowl once again, because that would be absolute cinema. The Ohio State Buckeyes, I have beating the Oregon Ducks here in the quarterfinal. That is where the run ends for Oregon. Dan Lanning, again, the conversation has brought up, can he win a big game? I think Ryan Day and company just have too much for this Oregon team. Kind of slipping up against Miami last year. I think they exercised those demons and beat Oregon once again. I think a lot closer than that previous playoff matchup with Oregon and in the regular season matchup. But I think Ohio State ends up just squeaking it out against the Ducks. National championship rematch of Indiana and Miami. I'm going to have the Indiana Hoosiers advancing over Miami once again. I think Kurt Cignetti gets the best of Mario Cristobal. I think Indiana holistically will have a better chance at beating Miami. I think they have a staff edge just slightly, even though Colton and I both love this Miami staff. I think Indiana holistically still has the best staff in the country, and they find a way to get a Big Ten rematch against Ohio State in the semifinals. Texas Tech advancing over Penn State to play Georgia. I'm going to have the Georgia Bulldogs exercising their demons of getting a first-round bye and making it to the semifinal. They get a first-round bye. They end up beating Texas Tech in the quarterfinal to play the winner of Oklahoma and Notre Dame in the semifinal, where I will have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish beating Oklahoma. Oklahoma's magical run ends there to get a great win on the road at Austin to beat Texas in the first round. They lose to Notre Dame. I think this Notre Dame team has a lot to prove, especially with how they ended their season last year, not making the playoff. I think Marcus Freeman is a man on a mission. This team is on a mission, and they are going to beat the Oklahoma Sooners, who set up honestly a cinematic semifinal round here with Ohio State and Indiana in a third time playing each other in the season. They play each other in the regular season and played each other in the Big Ten Championship. They play each other in the college football playoff semifinal, where I will have, some would say, an upset potentially over Indiana, especially with how Indiana has performed over the last few years. Beating the Indiana Hoosiers to make it back to the national championship game once again, where I will have them playing the winner of Kirby Smart versus Marcus Freeman, Georgia versus Notre Dame. I will have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish beating Kirby Smart and co. to make it back to the national championship, where they set up another rematch of the national championship from 2 years ago. Ohio State and Notre Dame meet in Las Vegas to crown a national championship, where I will have the Ohio State Buckeyes winning the national championship. The Ohio State Buckeyes are your 2027 national champions. Colton, full thoughts. Where did I go wrong? How does this play out in your mind based on these standings?
Well, first off, you have some pretty electric first round matchups. Like you said, Texas. I don't even have Oklahoma in my bubble. I don't remember if I even got to talk about them in this entire video. But Oklahoma is a team that if they do sneak in, they're going to have what is going to be the most dangerous thing that any team can have entering the playoff. Well, technically, two of the most dangerous things: a bitter taste in their mouth from last year's playoff, where they beat Alabama in the regular season and then lose in the playoff, and an elite defense. So I have no problem with the upset there over Texas. I would have no problem if you had them going even further, just because if that offense is, if they can run the ball and that offense is at least serviceable rather than just borderline inefficient like it was last year, and that defense is as good as it was last year, I think Oklahoma, if they sneak in, could make a very deep playoff run in 2026. I don't have any problem with your winners. Oregon, I think, is going to be stronger. Indiana is definitely going to be stronger. Texas Tech going to have another great defense like we saw last season. And Oklahoma, like I said, no problem with that. Then you move on into that. Ohio State, what is that? Ohio State, Oregon. In all likelihood, if Ohio State is capable of running the ball, which I think they will be with Arthur Smith to an efficient extent, I also agree there. I have them in my national title game, so I definitely am very, very high as well on Ohio State. Indiana beating Miami is interesting. I would probably predict that as well. That makes a ton of sense. Texas Tech, Georgia. Georgia's going to power rate better. Texas Tech might have a great defense. I just don't think Texas Tech offensively is going to match the firepower that Georgia is going to be able to have. Oklahoma and Notre Dame, like I said, I would not have been surprised at all. I would not have minded at all if Oklahoma beat Notre Dame. With a month rest, like I said, I'm not super high. I'm not quite sure of what to make of this Notre Dame team. They are a team on paper who's going to be capable of making a push that you predict, but it's going to be a wait and see for me. It's definitely going to be a matter of if they can, shake off those demons, exercise those demons, as you put so eloquently. You could really go, you could go either way there, and I would not be mad. Indiana, so many good things about Indiana. The biggest thing is quarterback. Ohio State doesn't have as many question marks, but their biggest question mark is probably the run game. I think, if anything, that might be the biggest question mark in this game. Indiana's is going to be Josh Hoover. Ohio State's is going to be, if they can run the ball efficiently, at least more efficiently than they did last year. No problem there with Ohio State. They're going to have an elite defense as well. Georgia and Notre Dame is an interesting one because of that game last year where Gunnar Stockton came into the game for Carson Beck, who was injured, and that was his first real test as a starter, was in the semifinals. That one I would probably have Georgia, but Notre Dame, like I said, on paper, nothing wrong with picking Notre Dame there. And then Ohio State, Notre Dame. The rematch, I would have to go Ohio State. I would have to agree with you there. Great prediction. Electric playoff. I have no issues really down the board other than maybe Georgia and Notre Dame, but you could really go either way once you get to that talent level that late in the season. I mean, I don't think many people had Indiana winning the national championship. I don't think many people had them playing Miami in the national championship, but that's what happened. It's college football. It's the college football playoff. So really, you could predict any combination of any of these teams, and you can't really argue because we don't have a crystal ball. But I think you did an immaculate job here, Reed.
But that will do it for this episode on Love for the Game. Again, this is my full playoff prediction. Let me know down in the comments below of who you have winning the national championship. Who do you have making the college football playoff? Who is going to be your biggest surprise? Obviously, a lot of people don't have Oklahoma potentially making the playoff. Colton doesn't have him making the playoff. Others in the space might have LSU making the playoff. I think LSU makes a solid run, gets into the playoff. Who do you think is going to make the college football playoff? And remember to subscribe to the Love for the Game YouTube channel, as well as Oh No Sports. Doing great work as always, Colton, friend of the program. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
You talked about picking the odds-on favorite. Well, to bring you a little bit of comfort, I believe the odds-on favorite was who I picked last year, and that was the Texas Longhorns. So it's hard to get more wrong than that.
Thank you for watching this episode. We will catch you guys in the next one. See you guys.